In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to do a request and response mapping in API Gateway. What's going on, guys? So let's keep it going with this API Gateway tutorial. So now I want us to talk about these squares: method request, integration response, and method response. What are they and why they are important? So we need to, I'll call this, I guess, request response mapping. So why are these important? So in essence, we can basically just modify incoming requests and responses. So basically, when the request comes in, we can do some verification to see if it follows a certain format, and that just makes it easier for our Lambda function to work with. And same thing for the response, we can modify the response so that it's in a certain structure. And this is good for incorporating more complex logic and more functionality into our APIs. So when we look here, method request defines how the API handles incoming client requests. Okay, the biggest one is request validation. They ensure all required parameters and payload conform to specific patterns and types. And we can include path, query string, and header string parameters. So you're going to see what that means if you don't understand that. But basically, if you remember, I was getting an error here for this GET request. I just realized I never showed the footage of me making the resource with the name path parameter, or the error I'm talking about, which is caused by me not mapping the inputs in the request to the parameters in the Lambda function. So for those of you who want to follow along, I'll just quickly include that footage right here. So perhaps I'll cut back when I quickly remake it. So no proxy, and create method, get method, no proxy, greet 7, create, and now we go here, enable cores with the get method, save, deploy the API to test, deploy that, go to stages, go here, big get, here, copy it, and I'll just put Tim. So these errors that you just saw were caused because I didn't do any request response mapping, since I created this new resource without proxy integration. Now back to the current video where I show you how to do request response mapping and how to resolve these errors. Suppose if I test on our greet function, let's say before this was our code, event.pathParameters.name, before I made this. That's because I took away the proxy and I didn't map the integration request. So this path parameter isn't being mapped to this value. So to this path parameters.name. So this is coming out null every time, and we don't know why. So let's go and test this, and we get this error. Now that's because we didn't do an integration request mapping. So I guess first you can see it before we continue. So let's go to integration request, click edit, and we got to go to mapping templates. Now we can have a template. You're going to need to fill this in. Usually it's empty, but here you got to fill this in. So here's the big thing. Here is where we give the instructions to API Gateway to say, hey, this value and name gets mapped to this path parameter. So writing these template bodies uses a language called VTL, Velocity Transform Language. So, Velocity Template Language. So there's some documentation on this, and I know pretty much everybody, there's a 0% chance anybody's gonna read this. I'm kidding. But VTL is the language that's used to write these templates, just to let you know. So you guys can search up VTL and read more about it. Moving on, let's see how we can map this path parameter to that variable. So what kind of object is being passed? Let's remember, guys, what object is being passed to our Lambda function? Let's see. It's the API proxy gateway object. And in here, there's this path parameters object. And it looks for the name is inside this. So we need to follow the exact same structure when we're writing our request mapping. So we're going to take path parameters and copy it. And then we're going to take name and copy it. So now we have the name. Now what is this supposed to be? That's where the VTL comes in. So if you look at the documentation, I just searched up API gateway mapping template, and then I clicked the second link. So how do we get that path parameter? So it says right here, input.params gets the path parameter. So we can get that using this line. I don't know why it's not letting me copy it. So get that here. This in double quotes. Now we just write the name of our path parameter. So in this case, that'll just be name. And that's all. Now then our input parameter named name will be mapped to this name. And that's all we needed to do. Now if we save this, you'll see we won't get that error anymore. So if we put Tim, now we get hello Tim. It works dynamically again because it's doing the integration request mapping, and we're getting sent back this response with status code and the body. Now we can delve a little bit deeper into the method request. I think you might understand we're just basically making sure the incoming data adheres to a certain structure. And it's the same thing for that's for the integration request. And you might be wondering, there's two parts to this. There's method request and integration request. So we did the integration request. We didn't need to do method request here. Yeah, transforms incoming request data for backend using VTL. And that's exactly what we did there. The backend integration endpoint, we specify our backend endpoint, Lambda, HTTP URL, integration type, in our case it's Lambda, maps client request parameters to backend parameters. That's the big point, guys, in the integration request. So from client path parameters, from client parameters, and query string parameters, header and body mapping. So that's exactly what we did here. And here you can read this to see how our request flows. So we didn't do any sort of incoming validation, but this is all about integration request mapping. And we can also do quickly an integration response mapping because it's not that hard. It's very similar. So let's say if in our, we are sending back this body with JSON.stringify response. So instead, let's say if I want it to be, instead of it being body, I want it to be result, and I don't want the status code to show. Let's just say for some reason I wanted it like that. Then all we would need to do is write our name. We could just call it result, and then input, but instead of input.params, it would be input.JSON, because this is a JSON object, guys. And it would just be in the root dot body. That's all it would be, I think. Yeah. So if you don't understand what does root mean, guys, root, all root is when you explore your files on your PC, root is like the base folder. You could think of it as kind of like a folder structure. So this OSC is like our root folder. Then if we go to apps, then we're going deeper and deeper, but C is the root folder. And it's a similar thing here. So I have this example. So suppose if we had this, suppose if we had a JSON structure like this, where it's like layer 1, layer 2, then num1, then num2. You see the root is this brackets, you see what's highlighted. Then layer 1 would be these brackets, and then layer 2 would be these brackets. So it's just specifying which part of the object we're in. So that's how, so now this response will be, instead of showing it the way it does, it'll be mapped to body when it comes out for us to see. So if we do this test again with Tom, now it got mapped with result, and the status code doesn't show, just to show you guys. So that is integration request and integration response mapping and API gateway. Thank you, and please subscribe.